Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today we have Chown. He's a lecturer in the Center of Islamic Thought and Education in University Futures at University of South Australia. His research focuses on teacher education and school renewal with emphasis on Islamic pedagogy and culturally, religiously responsive pedagogy as well as educational inclusion. Dylan is also a member of UNISA, Center for Research in Education and Social Inclusion. I'm so happy to get you today, and let's start our discussion, please. We would like to know from you your career as well as your achievement in the field of education. Yesterday, I talked to Mufti Ziad. He told me you have been training the teachers in all the Islamic schools in Australia. Could you please share with us the experiences?
Sure, Doctor. Well, firstly, assalamu alaikum to everyone, and thank you so much, Doctor, for this kind invitation. Maybe I could start the journey. I entered teaching straight out of school and went to university. I taught for about 7 or 8 years, and at that time, I accepted Islam. So I came into Islam. I had been a health and physical education teacher or a sport teacher. And when I accepted Islam, I thought to myself, well, it was the first time I'd heard about Islamic schools. And I thought, what a golden opportunity to serve the community, my new community, to grow in my own faith with my students. And I entered an Islamic school. I was the founding health and physical education educator or teacher in my Islamic school, later becoming the head of department. And we built together as a team, we built a health and physical education department in our Islamic school and gave our Muslim learners great opportunities to compete with other schools and to explore pathways into professions like physiotherapy and sports science, sports nutrition, coaching, teaching, of course, and the like. And sometime after that, entering an Islamic school, my previous experience, not only was I a HPE teacher, but I was also a co-manager of a not-for-profit organisation, which was a mentoring organisation and an Indigenous organisation. And of course, in Australia, we have Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the first peoples of Australia. And I was a co-manager of an organisation where that exposed me to a different worldview, a different philosophy when it came to education. So, Doctor, when I entered an Islamic school, I soon realised as a new Muslim, I was a little bit out of depth. I didn't know much about what it meant to be a Muslim educator. I didn't know much about an Islamic philosophy of education or what would be an Islamic worldview. And so began, I think, my journey in schooling and in teaching. And I was so fortunate after some years later in the Islamic school, I joined a group of academics and educators from around the world in the ITEP program, or the Islamic Teacher Education Program, which also had an office in the UAE and one in Toronto. And I was the only Australian representative, or the only representative in the Southern Hemisphere. I completed the course as a student, and I was very, very fortunate to be invited to come on after graduating as a member of faculty. And subhanAllah, I learnt so much from talented colleagues, of course, from all over the world, and so much about our rich educational heritage. And this became my passion. Later on, after becoming a head of department, I had the opportunity to become a member of this new centre, which is called CITE, C-I-T-E, which is the Centre for Islamic Thought and Education at the University of South Australia. And subhanAllah, it's funny, Allah is the best of planners, they say. And I was able to bring some of my experience from school land and from curriculum planning and assessment. And I played a lead role in helping, along with my team, in helping getting accredited our first program in Australia that's based on Islamic pedagogy. So that means that I left the classroom and I left the great privilege it is to interact with learners that are sort of 13 to 18. And now my quote unquote students are really my colleagues. So I'm I'm always now working with teachers, with adults, which it's such a noble profession, and you can imagine how blessed I feel to work with the many teachers. We've got about 60 in the program, and they're from all over Australia and also New Zealand. And with the SITE program, we had the great opportunity to collaborate with so many talented educators all over the world, the US, Canada, South Africa, the UAE, Malaysia, Indonesia, and so on. So little old me that grew up in Australia, in Brisbane, becoming a PE teacher, I had no idea that my world would open up, and I've had the opportunity to learn and to grow, and inshallah to serve others.
That's great to know the university experiences from your side. And moreover, I would like to get some maybe glimpses of your early experience with Islam, how you ended up there, and
Sure.
what was the influence or the inspiration to be there. Could you please?
Yes, subhanAllah, it was an exciting time for me. I think I was around about 14 years of age when I met, quote unquote, my first Muslim. So, and he's my best friend. He was my best friend when I was 14, and he's still my best friend. And I went to school with him at a high school. And like kids, you play sport together, you study together. We were in the same debating team, so we did debating, and I would stay over his house, and that was my first glimpse, I guess, to a Muslim family. And so many memories from that time, walking into their house, and I can still remember in their lounge room they had a picture of the Kaaba and a picture of all the Hajis praying, and it was sort of a wondrous sight that I'd never seen before. And he, like many Muslims, he was 14, 15, and he had his own library in his room. So he had all of these books, amazing religious books, the Gospel of Barnabas. He had the autobiography of Malcolm X, which I'd say was or Malik al-Shabazz. And I think this was, previous to that, I'd only read books about sports players, football players and the like. And this was the first time that I'd read a book of anything like this. And subhanAllah, I remember reading the whole book, but two parts stuck out. I think when Malcolm X returned from his Hajj and he wrote that letter, and also the end of his book. And I think those two moments, those early years, had such a profound effect on me. I had such a positive view of Muslim people from this early experience and the Muslim family, and they're still my family. Every Eid, I enjoy Eid with them, and subhanAllah, it's another great blessing. My best friend was my age, of course, but his mother ended up having more children, younger children. And later, when I entered the Islamic school, I ended up teaching his brothers. So it was sort of a really special. I went to school with him, and later I got to teach his brothers in an Islamic school. So that was my first exposure to Islam, if you like. Later, through my journey in life, I think into my 20s, I would run into Muslim people wherever I moved or travelled, and I had good experiences. I think by then my sort of quote unquote heroes were Malcolm X, and of course, being a sports person, Muhammad Ali. I think, which many people probably share that with me. And I just thought, as a young man, those two men stood out to me as just, mashallah, incredible men. And I think that left an impression on me. Later on, as I became sort of an adult, I questioned the purpose of life. It became more of a deep seeking for me. I was always God conscious. I was always sort of aware. I always felt like God was watching, and I always prayed at night. But I say I was a nominal religious person, born into a Christian family, but probably not strictly observant in a Christian tradition. So later in my adulthood, I sort of started to ask those big questions. Why are we here? What's our purpose? And I became uneasy in a sense, Doctor. I described it, and I think there's an intellectual, sometimes an intellectual path to Islam, and also sometimes a spiritual path. And I think they went hand in hand. And of course, in our worldview, they do. The intellect and the soul are connected. And later for me, I had a really an uneasiness feeling, I called it a second heartbeat. And I remember being invited to a mosque for the first time and meeting an imam for the first time. And I had a beautiful conversation. I observed the prayer and I went to the imam's house and we sat and had a conversation. He asked me 6 questions. Later, now I realized that he was asking me the articles of faith. But at that time, I didn't know the questions that he was asking. But after asking those questions, he said to me, you know, it seems in terms of what you believe, it's very much in line with being a Muslim. Did you come here to be a Muslim? And I said, no, I didn't come here with that intention. He said, but so you don't want to become a Muslim? I said, no, I do. And I gave Shahada then. And immediately that second heartbeat, which was an uneasy heartbeat, a feeling of anxiety, and I had it for a number of years. It was getting louder and more distinct inside of me. The minute, subhanAllah, that I gave Shahada, that heartbeat just left. And I immediately felt sort of peace. And I'm from that day forward, I've always been very, very grateful of being this beautiful gift, because it is a gift. It's not something of our own doing. It's hidayah, it's guidance. And it's the greatest gift that anyone could have. And I feel very, very fortunate and very blessed. And that's sort of that's the short version, Doctor.
Great, wonderful, really inspiring. Moreover, I would like to hear something, you are preparing now the pedagogies for the schools, especially for Islamic schools. Could you explain that you talked about the inclusions, how you are managing that social inclusions or the strains and maybe the troubles, that people face, when you think of this social inclusion in the Islamic curriculum?
Sure. Well, maybe I'll start with the public schooling sector, because we do some work there as well. And that's probably that's where I think inclusion is. Our public schools in Australia are very pluralistic, very diverse. So in any given classroom, there could be 4 or 5 Muslim students. There could be 4 or 5 students that are Indigenous students. There could be 4 or 5 students that come from a refugee background. They may be Muslim, they may be not. And then a whole range of different cultures, languages, and others. And what we do when we work with around social inclusion, we talk about the diversity that's in the classroom and seeing it as an asset, not being afraid of diversity, but seeing it as a strength. And we talk about pedagogy. Now, pedagogy is sort of a technical word, a Greek word, but essentially what we mean is the form of teaching and learning that's going on. And one of the things we emphasize is that each learner brings a richness from their cultural, from their languages, from their religion, from their backgrounds, from their families. And when we allow that to come into the classroom, everyone is enriched by that. We're enriched by our own sense of identity being recognized in the classroom as young people, students, and we're enriched also about knowing others. Of course, in the Quran, it talks about, we've been created in order to get to know one another. And when we talk about inclusion in the public school, it's about drawing from those assets and being responsive in our teaching and learning. So how we teach, how we recognise the identities in the room, how we draw on those assets to solve common issues or to discuss common concerns in a contemporary time. In Islamic schools, I think it goes back to, and I feel very blessed. I think my own experience, subhanAllah, when I reflect on coming into an Islamic school, I called it almost a pedagogy of not knowing. So I think humility is a very important quality to learning. When we humble ourselves, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can open for us. And I think I'm very grateful for the experience when I came into an Islamic school, being aware that actually I don't know. I'm not sure about an Islamic philosophy. So what's so exciting, we have 60 odd educators, some of them principals and school leaders, some of them middle leaders. And we talk about Islamic pedagogy as a distinct philosophy of education. So Islam is not only a sole subject of study, like what we might refer to as Quranic studies or Islamic studies. Yes, we have this, and this is a distinct feature, but we also have a distinct philosophy of education that helps us in the way we educate. So when we talk about creating a positive learning environment in a classroom or in a school, that there's certain ways that we can view our students, and we draw on the Quran and the Sunnah for how we view our students. We view them as being on fitrah. We view them as being receptive to learning. We view them as being as their voice being important, and then that shapes the type of classroom ecology that we want to create. We talk about our philosophy and how that shapes different types of teaching. So whether we do role modeling is such an important dimension of being a good teacher. So we model for our learners certain practices, and we do them together, we do them with them, which is a little bit different to sort of a didactic or lecture style. We look at halakha as a distinct teaching method. We look at how we can, what types of relationships that we need to hold with our learners that will engender that tarbiyah, that nurturing that we want to see in younger children, and in that tarbiyah, that unique drawing out as they become young adults and they are ready to leave and contribute to our communities, and not just the Muslim community, of course, but the global community and broader communities locally and further abroad. So I think what's the defining feature is how inspired educators are when they start finding themselves grounded in their own education tradition, in their own philosophy. And this naturally shapes the decisions and the way that we teach and learn in Islamic school settings. And they're the types of courses and the types of work that we do, which is really very exciting to me.
Yeah, really exciting. And also, this is in schools, how it comes to the universities. How is the inclusions and integrations that are happening in the campuses there in Australia?
SubhanAllah, our university is tremendous. It's part of their DNA. When we arrived at the university, our centre, there were 8 new colleagues, all of them academics, qualified academics who were Muslim. And SubhanAllah, we didn't ask. The first thing they did was build a prayer space for us. It's large, it's a massive prayer space, and that facilitates, not only but the prayers of the students. Just this evening, there was an iftar at the university, breaking a fast, and all of the faculty were invited. We've had tremendous support for our centre all along the way. We do a lot of intersectional work. We think that's important. The work that we do, we feel, has benefit to education broadly, not only Islamic schools and not only geared toward Muslim learners, that naturally we feel that our research and our teaching has benefit for many. And vice versa, we're open, as Islam is, we're open to benefiting and learning from the expertise of others. So we have very close relationships. You notice the Cressy Centre is the Centre for Research and Educational and Social Inclusion. So a lot of the themes there are themes of research and themes of teaching, which we share. So I would say that our university, it's part of their DNA. It's part of who they are. And we're very proudly an inclusive university.
Yeah, great. You know that Australian Muslim community is very diverse and then very multi-ethnic. And when you prepare a curriculum for that, how do you manage to include all the people from different backgrounds and different cultural, maybe even their family, ethnic language will be different? Which are the challenges in that case?
Doctor, you're asking the big question. This is one of the big questions in Islamic schooling globally. I think one of the things that we've done, which is distinctive, is we've taken a pedagogical focus. So we focused our attention on investing in the educators, because it's the teacher that makes all the difference. And we don't say that to put all of the responsibility or the amana on the teacher's shoulder, but rather to honour that it's that critical relationship between educator and learner, or educator and family and learner, and ultimately educator and Allah with the learner. Now, across internationally, one challenge for us has been the coming of what we call standardised curriculums. Now, the challenge with standardized curriculums is that they can be viewed as prescriptive and one size fits all. And that's challenging with all of the things that you just mentioned, that there's such diversity. We have a bit of a theme, and it's not ours, it's one broadly held, that every learner in a classroom should be able to see themselves in that curriculum. So our approach has been to invest in the deep knowledge and expertise of the teacher and to develop our teaching practice so that we can view that curriculum as a creative architect. So we don't see it as a list and we must do what's on the list, but we apply a certain lens through which we look at that curriculum so that we can be responsive to the students and the learners that are in our classroom. So if you or I were teaching, the learners that are in your classroom are different, have different needs, different interests than, say, the learners if I was in a different classroom. So we are developing our educators to be creative architects of curriculum and to develop tools how to integrate curriculum, how to renew why what are the aims, because curriculum has an aim and it shouldn't be just what, as a famous academic says, it shouldn't just be what knowledge we want to conjure in the student, but what person are we conjuring at the end of that curriculum? And therefore we focused on the teaching and learning and really investing in the teacher to be experts of curriculum. And that's been our approach, rather than sitting in a room and developing yet another standardized curriculum that can only sort of suit our learners and not other learners.
Yeah, that's remarkable. And also you have a lot of experience earlier, engaging with the students, maybe as a sport teacher, more than the academic other matters. And now I came to know that all these are supported by the Australian government, How is the support from Australian government, these kind of systems, especially making curriculums and arranging these things for the Islamic schools?
It's an excellent question. And I think it's a unique situation in Australia in the way that schools are funded. We have public schools which are essentially free, and anyone within the location of that public school is able to go to that public school. We also have the independent school sector, and this is Australian government's commitment to equity, commitment to recognising that families and communities have certain aspirations for their children and for the education of their children. So in the independent sector, we have Aboriginal schools, we have Catholic schools, Lutheran schools, there's some Montessori schools. So some of them are religious and some of them are non-religious. Some of them are non-denominational. Other are community schools, like Greek schools, language schools, and our Islamic schools also fall under that sector of independent schools. So in the interest of the two goals for Australian, for young people in Australia in education are equity and excellence. Usually it's the other way around, excellence and equity. And the independent schooling sector plays a really important role in ensuring and assisting, we believe, with that equity, without taking away, we hope, in any way from public schooling, which is available. And that's sort of where Islamic schooling fits. The funding for schooling in Australia is what we would say generous. Of course, in Australia, there's always desire and a need for more funding in schools, but we would have to say that schools are well funded by and large in Australia. There's also private schools, and private schools are a more elite type of a school, and they're more expensive to go to. So they would be the three sectors that we could speak of. Our independent schools, including our Islamic schools, are generally low fee paying. So they're not, people can afford them, but it's a choice for parents. About 80% of Muslim parents choose public schools, and about 20% and growing are choosing Islamic schools for their children.
Okay, great. Let's come to some of personal matters. How you feel Ramadan. How was your Ramadan earlier time? Because you will have first experience of Ramadan and the long journey after that. How do you feel the Ramadan? All things. Let's see.
SubhanAllah, I love it when our leaders, our imams and ustadas, they talk about Ramadan being this beautiful visitor, and I really feel like that captures it. It's so beautiful. I must admit, Doctor, my first Ramadan was challenging. I think I was 27 years of age. I'd never fasted in my life. I think I'd been a Muslim for around about 6 weeks. So I was racing the clock. I set a goal that I wanted to be able to perform both a Farad and a Sunnah prayer. So to perform a Sunnah prayer, I needed 4 surahs. So I think I had 6 weeks, and I quickly as I could, I learned, Surah Fatiha and 4 surahs and how to pray. And I was sort of ready for my Ramadan. And that was my first. And I have to admit, I can remember going to work, coming home at about 3:34, and I would pray Asr, and then I would just roll over on the prayer mat, Doctor. I would roll over on the prayer mat, and I would just snooze and just wait for the Adhan to come. That was my first Ramadan, and I found it quite challenging. But toward the end of it, subhanAllah, it's like anything. The first week, it's sort of physical, and when that spiritual energy kicks in, of course, it's something else. But my first one was challenging at 27. Working in a school, I see the young children fast, and they do it so easily. They're playing soccer and fasting, but it's just they keep going. And I can't say that I ever had that energy, but I love Ramadan, alhamdulillah. It's subhanAllah, it's that beautiful visitor. And I think now as a father, it's a little bit different for me. I really enjoy the excitement of my own children, and sort of the almost we're like a shepherd. All of us are a shepherd to our own flock, and I feel that I sort of put a lot of joy in ensuring that my children enjoy, and my wife enjoys a beautiful Ramadan with me, inshallah.
Yeah, that's great, because we feel that the kids, they struggle for fasting, but we feel that how they enjoy when it's come to our own. That may be the feeling you got. That's great. And because from the schools, sometimes they tell that, oh, it's maybe very hard for the kids for fasting.
Yeah, but they are, I think, it's like environment. When you're in an environment, you're feeling, you know why you're doing it. And I was saying that to my children today. It's not that we're just not eating, we're fasting, and that's different. When when you're busy at work and you forget to eat and it's 2:00 and you're hungry, that's a different feeling. When you're fasting with intention, with niyyah. You're fasting for the pleasure of Allah, and you're fasting with a clear purpose that inshallah Allah increases us in taqwa, and it's a different feeling, and it's a beautiful feeling. But the children make it look easy, subhanAllah. The young people, I think it's such a blessing. I think teachers enjoy this. Being in that environment where you're motivated and you're feeding off the energy of the community, and then going to the masjid and feeding off the energy there, and it's a beautiful feeling. I can imagine where you live, Doctor, it would be a beautiful environment, mashallah.
Yeah, we have wonderful environment here. And when we come to these matters, I would like to ask you from your own experience that actually people are struggling sometimes. When we teach Islam, there will be book from different cultural background that is brought to the other country and teaching. Now you are in the path of making your own curriculum and designing the pedagogy for the Australian. So how do you feel the difference, making curriculum by Australians and teaching by Australian for the Australian people, how it's different, and how you evaluate all these things, bringing curriculum from maybe the Islamic culture. Some people maybe think that Arab culture is Islamic exclusively, maybe that there will be a cultural conflicts or something, How do you manage that in Australian atmosphere?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, firstly, in our program, we have, in our Islamic schools, I should say, Islamic schools in Australia, we have many teachers that are not Muslim, and even leaders that are not Muslim that are serving in these Islamic schools, as I know there are overseas. And mashallah, they do a tremendous job and make a tremendous contribution. Communities, and indeed Islam has always been pluralistic. We've never been insecure. We've always been connected in our communities, including in the first communities of Islam. So I think that, if you're talking about Islamic schooling, everyone in Islamic schooling needs access to the vision of the school. Everyone in the Islamic school needs access to the philosophy, the unique Islamic philosophy of education. And when we do our professional learning, we include everyone in that. And most teachers find that it helps them reach their students, and therefore they're very passionate about it. And of course, the values that emanate from Islam are values that many educators sort of feel philosophically aligned to. In terms of the curriculum, as you say, one of the things we're doing is really sharing and embedding across our schools and education and some of our writing, the rich history of Australian Muslims. And this is really something local, something really beautiful and interesting. Some of the first visitors to Australia who interacted with the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people centuries before the British came were the Macassans from Indonesia, and who were fishermen. And they visited annually to the northern parts of Australia and traded. They exchanged language. Sometimes there was intermarriage. And this is part of what we call one of the beautiful historical anchors of Islam in Australia. We also had the Afghan Kamalias, or the Muslim Kamanias. Some of them were Afghani and others were Indian and other ethnic groups. And in Australia, the unique Australian history, the opening up of Australia, the telegraph pole, which the Kamalias brought their camels and helped track across Australia, which led to the telegraph poles, which means that Australia could communicate with China and England and India and such places. And the gold rush, which was a huge economic boom in the 18th century, it wouldn't have been possible without the Muslim. So we talk about the contribution of Muslim peoples, both historical, those two historical anchors being the Macussan and also the Kamalias, and also the diversity of Muslims contributing. Some of our sports stars, I'm a bit biased because of my background, but some of our football stars and our cricket stars and our netball stars, some of them are Muslim, and they're from all different backgrounds. And I think that is a powerful illustration of the diversity of Islam. And I love Dr. Omar Farouk's, he talks about this, and he talks about we have unity in diversity. And our diversity is that beautiful strength with that patchwork quilt of the Ummah. And I think we're really trying to emphasize this type of narrative. It's a strength-based narrative, it's a beautiful narrative, and it's one shared by Muslims globally, I think, in many locations around the world. So that's something that we do to
Thank you so much for sharing your time with us. We have a conference in May, based on these the multiple dimension of the Ummah in the community. Hope we will extend the invitation, inshallah. So happy to get you, and hopefully we'll have more occasion to meet and share the experiences. Once again, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khair.